you're it's Jace's wheelhouse, the interpretation. All of it is.
All right, here we are. We've got the cool people are here. It's a dozen of us. The other dozen will show up maybe. If not, it's okay. We'll go strong with the dozen we have. And our Facebook friends are live now. Nice to see all of you. And we are in the book of Revelation. So if you joined us today, you are here for the end of the empire. That's what I titled this one because it sounded cool. Maybe fallen is Babylon the Great. That's what we're talking about today. Chapter 18. Let me pray for us. Thank you, our Father. Another opportunity we have together to study your word. Help us to understand, to grab hold of this truly ancient literature and be able to move it into our life, to understand what you had for them and hopefully maybe what you have for us, and help us to enjoy our time just being together too. And we ask all this in your name. Amen. All right, so I'm not going to intro this with anything brilliant about what kind of class this is at this time. I'll just do that every few weeks. This will be good. I think I know everybody here. So, except for the man, the myth, and the legend, that I can't tell who that is, but I'm glad he's here. Because there's a myth and a legend, and that's awesome. Let's get our Bibles. Let's do this. Let's start off with this. Tell me your most interesting funeral story. I know that seems like a crass beginning, but like I've had my funeral sorrow. So if I can say it out loud, you can probably deal with it as well. Do you have like a funeral that was just different? That, I don't know, was there crying and was it joyful? What was your response to some funeral you've been to?
I've had two funerals I've gone to in the last month. Both were suicide, both gunshot wounds to the head.
Wow.
And both funerals, one was my cousin, one was Terry. Terry is a guy that I was working with in Alcoholics Anonymous, sponsoring him, quote unquote. And my cousin was somebody who was younger than me, who kind of looked up to me. And I felt, I had some like survival remorse, survivor's guilt, because I've had such a crazy life that I somehow survived. But anyways, the crazy story is that not only are both suicides, both gunshot wounds to the head, but at the end, the last song in both funerals was Vince Gill's "Go Rest High on That Mountain," which I thought was just, I think, what are the odds? I don't know, if just very emotional, sad. The interesting thing is I kind of tucked these things away in some far corner in the inner recesses of my mind, like in the back in the corner. I didn't want to think about them. And then when the funeral came, I was able to process. I mean, I bawled like a baby. So it was a grieving process that I didn't want to face.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, survivor's remorse, not wanting to face what's happened. Yeah. Anybody else had particular?
We attended a funeral a few years ago that was unlike anything I've ever experienced. One of Travis's best friends was killed by her boyfriend, and her brother, who was a eccentric sort of fellow, got up and spoke. And I have never heard the words that he used in any sort of memorial service or funeral. He was very angry and he did not hold back his feelings. And it was super interesting. But it was also one of the most truthful things I've ever heard said at a funeral, because he just let it all out. It was kind of powerful in its own way.
Yeah.
I've done a couple interesting funerals in the last year. one was a family that struggled with drug addiction throughout the whole family, and so they were talking throughout the entire service. That was kind of interesting to try and push through preaching while everybody's, doing drugs or chattering away. But I think the most memorable funeral that I've done recently was for that patient that I mentioned a month and a half ago who had been cheated on several times by her husband. He was a pastor, and then she lost her leg, and then she died relatively young. And she found great hope when I read Psalm 44 to her, which is just a psalm that shaking your fist at God, and there's no high point at the end. And so she gave me permission to use that passage at her funeral. And I don't know that passage had been used at many funerals before, but she allowed for me to talk about how she had been an atonement for all of us, watching her faithfulness and pressing into God through her pain and remaining faithful. We had talked very at length about the concept of atonement, and how we can make atonement even today. And so that was a very special funeral, because she was willing to go there with me.
Nice. Yeah, you probably do more funerals than any of us here. Go to more of them and do more of them.
Yeah.
Very deeply profound for me was my daughter's funeral 18 years ago. And the dichotomy between just wanting to vomit, wanting to scream, but at the same time as my hands were raised high in worship. We had a worship service. I was a worship leader at the time, and the band that I was with, they led worship, and it was an incredible worship service, and it was just the strangest, almost out of body experience. And the other profound thing was the pastor's first words out of his mouth when he got on the platform was, "You've just been handed your credentials." And I wanted to stand up and just scream at him, "I don't want him, you can have him back." But no true words. I've been able to minister to so many other moms who have walked through what I've walked, and it was just very deeply impacting on so many levels.
Well,
My interesting funeral was my husband's. He planned it, and he did not want it to be. He didn't want anything said about him. He invited two preachers from not Presbyterian denominations. I'm not really sure if they said any denomination. They just were followers of Jesus. One was a Black guy he'd met in a program of recovery, and another one was just a guy who grew up in our neighborhood, and he also had been a counselor in the hospital. And Wallace had I guess, helped them and encouraged them in their ministries. And he wanted them to preach the love of Jesus and at his funeral. And Amy was there too, Amy. And and he wanted Amy because he had two daughters and was in a family of women. And he wanted a woman to be there representing the kingdom of God. And so that was the funeral he planned for himself.
okay, man. Okay, so we've gotten 5 different experiences. You've all had experiences with funerals at this point in your life. If you're older than 30 years old, I'm sure that you've experienced them to some degree. I'm going to read a text to you that is not the Revelation text. Then we're going to read a few verses there. And we're going to try and pull all of this together. So the text is from Isaiah chapter 21, and it's the end of verse 8. and verse 9. So it says, and the lookout shouted, day after day, my Lord, I stand on the watchtower. Every night I stay at my post. Look, here comes a man in a chariot with a team of horses. And he gives back the answer. Babylon has fallen, has fallen. All the images of its gods lie shattered on the ground. O my people, crushed on the threshing floor, I tell you what I've heard from the Lord Almighty, from the God of Israel. So this is a prophecy from Isaiah the prophet, right, on the country of Babylon. Fallen, fallen is Babylon. And we're going to hear that in the text that we come to today. It's stolen, it's grabbed hold of from Isaiah. What is happening in Revelation is a funeral dirge. So we've got 3 different sections, and we'll read them in 3 sections, verses 1 through 8 is where we'll start. And I want you to see the, it's something that's spoken of as if it's in the past, but it's actually still to come in the future, right? Babylon has fallen. It's a prophecy about, oh, whoa, whoa. So it's not a person who has passed. It's a whole world that they are crying out, lamenting over this death, but not everyone is lamenting. Okay, so that's what I want us to kind of go into and see the lament side and see this other side that's going to come most heavily in chapter 19 if we get to it. There's not a lot of heavy theology and things like that here, but there's some great discussion we can have if we want to on practical issues, but we won't take a long time going through the text, I don't think. So we might be able to get into chapter 19. We'll just see how you guys go in there. But will somebody read Revelation chapter 18, verses 1 through 8? Who wants to do that? That doesn't read on a regular basis.
I can read it.
All right, Mary, you're on.
After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice, he shouted, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable animal. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The king of the earth committed adultery. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit enthroned as queen. I am not a widow. I will never mourn. Therefore, in one day, her plagues will overtake her. Death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her.
All right, in one sentence, what is the theme or what is the idea here? What would you get across if you had to say this in one sentence? What's he trying to say? If you have to do 2 sentences, it's okay. The point is, make it short.
Idolatry doesn't work.
Idolatry doesn't work. Okay, that's a good one. Yeah.
What goes around comes back around. I thought I
nice.
told you.
All right. What goes around comes back around. Yeah. Anybody else have anything great?
Don't glorify
Committing.
yourself, glorify God.
Don't glorify yourself, glorify God. Good.
Committing adultery with God's covenant brings consequences.
Okay. Good. Yeah, and that's sincerely, like if you jump to chapter 19 and you look at verse 7, you're going to find the antithesis of that, which is let us rejoice and be glad and give him glory, which is where Josh was going and where Fran was going, for the wedding of the Lamb has come and his bride has made herself ready. Instead of the adultery, we have the bride of Christ coming. So those are all fantastic summaries All right, so let's look at just the first few verses. Let's just start in verse 1. There's another angel that's coming at this point. Down from heaven, great authority, earth made bright with his splendor. This is not super hard to interpret, I don't think. We don't know who the angel is or anything, but an angel is coming down and he's bright as can be, or it or she, neuter beings, of course, angels, right? And of course he's bright as can be because coming out of heaven, this is where God is, and God is 1,000 suns. So he's coming with all the authority and all the brightness that's there, and he calls with this mighty voice. And here's where we get the title of all this: Fallen. Fallen is Babylon the Great. What does it mean that it's become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit, a haunt of every foul and hateful bird? What's going on there? What are you picturing? Right?
Yeah.
Remember, this is all images.
Death and nastiness.
Yeah. Death, nastiness. Good. I'm picturing, I don't know if you saw the Facebook post, I'm picturing this apocalyptic, an ugly polluted hell. Good. I'm picturing that apocalyptic look from, I don't know, Eli, the book of Eli, or just with animals running around. It's the place has been destroyed. So there's, who knows, lions running, birds, which are generally these kinds of birds are like omens of badness, right? With the haunts. We get the idea of demons here, which is another big thing. So, which shows up in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. These demons seem to come when the place is destroyed. So yeah, it's a mess. Isaiah 13. Let's see how many times we can go back to Isaiah. Isaiah 13:21 says, "But desert creatures will lie there, jackals will fill her houses. There the owls will dwell, and there the wild goats will leap about. Hyenas will howl in her strongholds, jackals in her luxurious places. Her time is in her hand, and her days will not be prolonged." And that wild goats is often translated as demons. We don't know if it's wild goats or demons, but whatever. It's the whole idea of these desert creatures. It's where things go that are just bad. So this has become depopulated. Just a few people wandering around. Maybe it's zombies. It's the way we would look at it now. Just people wandering through the streets, brains, right? Just, it's a mess. And the wine of Babylon, we've discussed this more than once. So it intoxicates all the kings who now are going to follow this Babylon and all of her luxury and wealth. So all the kings are following her and after her. And that luxury is going to keep showing up. It starts in verse 3. You've already seen it in verse 7. It's going to show up again in verse 9. In fact, you might argue this is going to be the theme of the whole thing. That Babylon is only focused on economics and prosperity and luxury. And that's why she's fallen. She wasn't focused on the right things. So that'll be our discussion at the end when we get there. All right, so I hear another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, lest you take part in her sins, lest you share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities." So does anybody remember the book Pilgrim's Progress? Has anybody read Pilgrim's Progress? Yep, 3 or 4 people have.
I am.
Fantastic book. John Bunyan, who is not a scholar or anything, but he's given us a great allegory. There's a place where Christian or pilgrim, depending on your reading of it, comes to this city. It's called Vanity Fair. And in Vanity Fair, he begins to enjoy, or he's trying not to, but
No, it's the fair in the city of Vanity.
yes, the fair in the city of Vanity. The chapter's called Vanity Fair. That's all I remember, and I didn't read it before coming in here. But it's this place of luxury and joy, and everybody's happy, and hedonism, and it's just a constant party. And
It reminds me of like the 16th century, like Avignon, the priests in Avignon, like are like just the corruption of the Catholic Church before the Reformation.
yeah,
Like just it's licentiousness, just complete corruption.
yep, it's complete corruption, and they pull hopeful and Christian into, yeah, so you're right, it is kind of like there's almost the Christians seem to condemn them, put them in prison and cages, and yeah, it's this disaster. But that's what we're looking at here, right? Sin's as high as heaven, and the call is to come out. Augustine says we must renounce our rights as citizens of this world and flee unto God on the wings of faith. So it's this literal call, I think, for them to leave Rome, but really a metaphorical, a step further, right? A metaphorical, leave the city, the empire. Leave it because the sins, you'll be attracted to the sins, and because, hey, guess what? There's a plague coming. You need to flee this place, get out of here, because God's judgment is coming down. And we've already seen the bowls, right? The trumpets, the seals. We've already seen that coming down. So get out of this place, run and be free. So the words are come out of her, my people, which you've heard, I'm sure, many times. Of course, we have that discussion, which I hope we're going to get to. What does it mean to come out of her? Like, how can you be in the world, but not of it? I mean, that's always the question there. So, yeah, let's keep going. Stop me wherever you want. By the way, her sins are as high as the skies. Same comment in Jeremiah regarding Babylon. So Jeremiah and Isaiah are going to hit this pretty strongly about what's happening in Babylon. So 6, render to her as she herself is rendered, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double draught for her in the cup she mixed. So that, right, she's getting a double portion of what's happening, right? Everything that was due to her. Just like Randall said, right? Whatever happens, it's coming back around, right? You dish it out, it's going to be coming back on you. And so she's given in like measure. She glorified herself and played the wanton. So give her like measure of torment and mourning, since in her heart she says, a queen I sit, I am no widow. Mourning I shall never see. So this arrogance, right? I'm in charge. There's nothing bad can happen to me. I've got it made. And this is Nebuchadnezzar, right? This is the king of Tyre. All those that in the book of Isaiah and Ezekiel, where they say, you've lifted yourself up to the seats of God, to the throne of God. He says, I'm going to cast you down. Yeah, or like Jezebel. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, she sees herself invincible, and it's going to happen. The plagues are going to come in a single day, pestilence, mourning, and famine, and she'll be burned with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. So here he is, sovereign Lord. Now remember what's happening. Remember the people are being persecuted. They're being hurt. And God is saying, I've got you. This is where it's all coming down. When we get to chapter 19, a very strong angel is going to grab a millstone, a giant millstone. He's going to throw it into the ocean, which is basically saying, this is the end of the empire forever. Destroyed forever. Okay, so this is good news. Okay, it's this funeral dirge. Poor Babylon, woe is Babylon, right? There's a lot of people crying about this, but it's also a reason to rejoice. So again, when we get to chapter 19, it's going to be hallelujah, for the Lord God Almighty reigns, right? He has finally vindicated us. All the things that they were asking before, how long, O Lord, before you vindicate your righteousness? Right? Yeah, it's happening. The empire is being destroyed. All right, so we need the next section. Who wants to read verses 9 through 20?
You want me to get that, Jace?
Yes, Randall, I want you to get it. 9 through 20.
Okay. The kings of the earth who committed fornication with her and shared her luxury will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke from her fire. They will stand far off, fearful of her tortures. Alas, alas, they will say, the great city, Babylon, the powerful city, your judgment has come in a single hour. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, because nobody will buy their cargo anymore. Their cargo of gold and silver, of precious stones and pearls, fine linen and purple, silk and scarlet, all the sweet smelling wood, carved ivory, vessels of expensive wood, brass, iron, marble, cinnamon, oriental spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, wheat, cattle, sheep, horses, chariots, and bodies, yes, human lives. All the fruit for which you longed has gone from you. All your luxuries and sparkling objects have been destroyed. You won't find them anymore. The merchants who sold these things and who made themselves rich from her will stand a long way off for fear of her tortures. They will weep and mourn and say, alas, alas, the great city. It was clothed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, decked out in gold, precious stones and pearls. But in a single hour, such great wealth has been destroyed. All the master mariners, all those who ply their ships to and fro, all sailors, all who do business on sea, stood a long way off and shouted out when they saw the smoke of her fire, who is like the great city, they said. They threw dust on their heads and shouted out, weeping and mourning, alas, alas. They said, the great city, everyone who had ships on the sea could get rich from her wealth, but in a single hour she has become a desert. Celebrate over her, heaven and you, holy ones, apostles and prophets, because God has passed against her the sentence she passed against you.
It almost feel like the I think of the fornicating when we like the cheating, like getting ours before we just like deserve it, or adultery, like, you know, committing adultery with this beautiful city with all these great things coming to you, and it's like we've put these things as our idols. We put them before the real thing. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not beautiful, but the
Yeah.
depiction is beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful image of something horrific. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so I want to read two passages to you. I'm just going to jump back. Isaiah chapter 23. You've got all that in your mind. This long list of things, this adulterous person / empire, right? So here is chapter 23 of Isaiah, talking about Tyre, the place Tyre. At that time, Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years, the span of a king's life. But at the end of these 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the prostitute. Take up a harp, walk through the city, O prostitute forgotten. Play the harp well, sing many a song so that you will be remembered. And at the end of 70 years, the Lord will deal with Tyre. She will return to her hire as a prostitute, and will ply her trade with all the kingdoms on the face of the earth. Yet her profit and her earnings will be set apart from the Lord. They'll not be stored up or hoarded. Her profits will go to those who live before the Lord for abundant food and fine clothes. So this is just another one of those funeral dirges, right? What we have in this section are three groups of people bemoaning the fate of the empire. Okay, they are the kings, the merchants, and the men of the sea. All of them are singing about the things that are happening right now to Tyre, to Babylon, to Rome, to the empire power, right? The beast is being destroyed right now. So that's, they get that imagery from Isaiah, the prostitute, which is going to show up because we got the prostitute, right? The harlot on the seven-headed monster. But later on, we're going to have the bride of Christ. So you have to see 18 and 19 next to each other. Because remember, the whole Old Testament is about this adulterous nation, Israel, and these other adulterous nations as well, but Israel primarily. So, okay, so you got the Isaiah thing. Here's Ezekiel. I want to read a larger section in Ezekiel, starting in verse 12, I think. Yes, Ezekiel 27, verse 12. Tarshish did business with you because of your great wealth of goods. They exchanged silver, iron, tin, and lead for your merchandise. Greece, Tubal, and Meshech traded with you. They exchanged slaves and articles of bronze for your wares. Men of Beth Togarmah exchanged workhorses, war horses, and mules in your merchandise. The men of Rhodes traded with you in many coastlands where your customers. They paid you with ivory tusks and ebony. Aram did business with you because of your many products. They exchanged turquoise, purple fabrics, embroidered work, fine linen, coral, rubies for your merchandise. I'm going to just list the other things. Wheat from Minnith, confections, honey, oil, balm for your wares. Wool from Zahar, iron, cassia, and calamus, saddle blankets, Let's see here, business, lambs, rams, and goats, precious stones, gold, all kinds of spices, beautiful garments, blue fabric, embroidered work, multicolored rugs with cords twisted and tightly knotted, and it continues. Okay, so this section in Revelation 18 has 15, I think, is it 15? Where did I write that? Wrote it somewhere. 15 of the 23. I know it's in here somewhere. It's going to come upon me. But it's this rebuke on Tyre, this rebuke on Babylon, which is considered to be this economically invincible country. We've got it made. Everything is in our power, and it's called a prostitute. Okay, so the kings of the earth, they committed fornication. We said that one. Thou great city, thou mighty city of Babylon, in 1 hour your judgment has come. So the kings who have come into agreement with Rome concerning trade are now showing themselves to be arrogant. So everybody involved in this is just, they've lifted up so high, and now the smoke is announcing their destruction. So we dealt with this when we talked about hell, right? This is one of those passages where they've just been burned out. And the destruction is incredibly quick. And then it lists all these different things. And the merchants are upset because their moneymaker is gone. And Rome was the best moneymaker in the world at that time, at least as far as we know. This is the place. I just wrote down a few things. One of Nero's banquets, the roses alone cost the equivalent of $100,000 at one of his banquets. Okay. Vitellius liked delicacies like peacock's brain and nightingale's tongues. In 1 year, he spent $20 million almost entirely on food. This is the extravagance. One Roman, after squandering his fortune, killed himself because he couldn't live on the mere pittance that remained, which was the equivalent of $300,000. Okay, he couldn't live on it, just I'd rather kill myself. The Talmud, which is a Jewish authoritative commentary, says 10 measures of wealth came down into the world. Rome received 9 and all the rest of the world 1. That's the kind of wealth we're talking about here, economically invincible. And then we've got this list of, just to impress you with the wealth, silver dishes, bathing in silver tubs, 60 million slaves in Rome at this time. And then it just keeps going. It lists all these things, the same cry that the kings made pertaining specifically to why the merchants would be depressed about Rome's fall. You can read all this stuff. There's nothing brilliant here. They throw dust on their heads. It's a lament. It's a funeral dirge. Picture a courtroom where Babylon is found guilty of perjury, and God requires the death penalty on her. Okay? And all the victims get to be involved in it. So anything you want to say? I mean, I'm just repeating what you're already seeing and just reminding you what it says so we can get the big picture. But we can keep going.
I think it's interesting that adultery is mentioned too, because, adultery is sort of different than fornication. Adultery means you have some relationship that's been broken. The covenant, Abraham, with God's children, to me, I see adultery as being even worse than fornication.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. And just remember what the Old Testament is filled with, right? So adultery equals idolatry. I know I've said that in class before, but that is really something you have to fit into your theological structure as you read the Old Testament, because God is constantly calling his people and others prostitutes, or really the word is whores. It's a little bit more.
I think of adultery like adultery could be like, hypothetically, I'm married, but I take a client or somebody out to dinner. That's like cheating, but that's it. Fornication seems like, I just think of like sex. Like that's the first thing I think about. Like it's like intercourse. So I don't know. I mean, what is, if adultery equals idolatry, what does fornication equal? Like, if we're using this.
I think it's supposed to be the same idea. So both are concerned with sexual sin. Adultery and fornication are both sexual sin. So you have the most intimacy, and you are either selling that if you're a prostitute, you're giving it away if you're fornicating, or adultery, you're stealing from someone else. But all of it is the most intimate of a relationship that you are.
Or going back to Fran, though, also adultery, because if someone says, well, you had an emotional affair, that's worse than than sex. Like, this is all using it like modern day. I'm trying to make it equivalent to how I'm thinking. It's like adultery could be, going after what Fran was going after, adultery could be worse than it's almost like if it's like oh, well, you had an emotional affair, which is worse than just having sex with the person. Like, it could be like, it's like, so that's like God saying, it's like you're not only like involved, like you're not even like physically involved, but you're like emotionally involved.
I had a covenant with you.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, covenant. That's a great.
I had a covenant with you.
Yeah,
You are adulterous too, in that sense.
Yeah, I don't think I want to get into, which one is worse, emotional or physical. Because I don't think that's what God is doing in here. I don't think that's what he's doing. I think he's saying you have the most intimate relationship possible with me. I am your husband, right? That's what God says. I'm your husband.
Yeah.
And you are out selling your body to the Egyptians.
Yeah.
Or you are out giving it away and not even making any money, right? But God's saying, I'm the best lover you can possibly imagine. And what are you looking for? Like, we're all looking for lovers somewhere else, which I say often from the pulpit, right? We are so satisfied with beauty that is not permanent, right? We get distracted, attracted to something else. And God says, well, I'm right here. Right? How can you possibly be looking somewhere else? Doesn't make any sense. So we've made a covenant with somebody, God, and we've broken the covenant by going somewhere else. So that's why Deuteronomy 17 is all about the king, right? The king, you should read through the law, make sure you keep all things of the law. Don't call on other countries. It's why in Isaiah, Ahaz is condemned by Isaiah because he calls on Assyria for help instead of calling on God for help. It's a constant theme throughout scripture, is getting your needs met by another lover.
Jace, you can always call on me to make it. You can always call on me to make it weird. Right?
Thanks, Josh.
Well, to make it, I think, a little bit better and more relevant is this. Don't think of it necessarily as it has to be a sexual thing. Like, you're whoring around with, money too. Like, your corporate whoring or your whatever capitalistic whoring. I mean, it's not limited to sexual stuff.
No.
So let me say it differently, because I thought that would have been very clear. This isn't dealing with sexual stuff, right? I mean, it might be, that might be one of the things, but when he talks about adultery, he means idolatry. So idolatry is whatever you hold up as your idol. So exactly, you're whoring after money or whatever, right? You are finding your strength, your power, your satisfaction, your assurance in something other than God. Whether that's in the arms of another female or male, whether that's your 401k, whether that's your hobby, whether that's your children, we all have things that that distract us from God.
Well, we all, and to go back to the sexual thing, just to clarify, it could be equivalent, because too, if you're doing something out of habit, so you're addicted to something, or you're doing it's out of habit, or you're committing idolatry because it's a habitual, but it's different than like the emotional aspect of one is habitual. It's like you're just doing it out of instinct, or like sin of omission. But if it's a sin of commission, like you're consciously doing it, like you're coming to it. You're like, I know it's like premeditated almost. Like, I know I'm going to go do it. Like, that's, to me, it's like that. Anyways, that's the difference. I'm trying to clarify the difference I was trying to make with fornication and adultery.
Yeah, I think that's something we should return to in a little while. when we start having like a little discussion on this, because I sometimes wonder, I think a lot of us are guilty of this, and it's not intentional. Right? We're not purposefully saying, yeah, God, I don't want to trust in you, I'm going to trust in this. But we're still prostituting ourselves, and we might not even realize it. We're so steeped in it. It's so part of our life that we don't even realize, hey, I'm being very flirtatious. I'm being outright adulterous, whatever.
I'm in the world.
Yeah, I'm in the world. That's right. And of the world, apparently.
Mhm.
Yeah, habituated to it. Yes. Just part of it. So let me just read this last little bit, because this is what I want to talk about. And then we'll go into 19 if we want to. But we only have a few more verses here. And I told you that this passage was in chapter 19, but it's not. It's right here. So I've been working on 2 chapters at once. But will somebody read just these final 4 verses? There are just 4 left. I think. Somebody want this last little section? The
A
final
mighty angel
Okay.
up a boulder the size of a great millstone and hurled it into the sea, saying, with violence like this will the great city Babylon be hurled down, never to be found again. The sound of harpists and musicians, flute players and trumpeters will never again be heard in you. No worker of any trade will ever again be found in you. The sound of a mill will never again be heard in you. The light of a lamp will never again shine in you. The voice of bridegroom and bride will never again be heard in you. For your businessmen were the most powerful on earth. All the nations were deceived by your magic spell. In her was found the blood of prophets and of God's people, indeed of all who have ever been slaughtered on earth.
Good. All right. So this mighty angel comes out. We've seen the mighty angel before. He had the little scroll, right? This could be the same mighty angel. He's obviously very mighty. He's picking up this huge stone as big as a giant millstone, which one person can't pick up. These are gigantic stones, and throws it into the sea, not drops it. He is purposefully, intentionally heaving it into the sea and saying, it's just like this, where I've thrown it into the sea, never to be seen again. Babylon, the great city, will be thrown down with violence and shall be found no more. So Jeremiah 51, I do this just so you remember, Revelation is not a scary book. If you know where these texts come from in the Old Testament, they're just grabbing hold of that language and pulling it forward for a new time. So Isaiah 51, verse 63 and 64. When you finish reading the scroll, remember, the mighty angel had a scroll. When you finish reading the scroll, tie a stone to it and throw it into the Euphrates. Then say, so will Babylon sink to rise no more because of the disaster I will bring upon her, and her people will fall. The words of Jeremiah end here. That's actually part of the text. The words of Jeremiah end here. So it's the exact same story, right? Babylon is being destroyed in the Old Testament. And he's saying Babylon is being destroyed in the New Testament. It's not Babylon. Just to remind you, it's Rome that's being talked about. It's not just Rome. It's every empire who sets itself up in the place of God, who is finding its satisfaction somewhere else. Right? Good. Thanks. All right. So, yeah, let's see. Anything else really significant that you noticed here that you want to? One thing I noticed in verse 21, 22, and 23, where the words no more shows up 6 times. It's just very poetic, right? There will be no more music in Rome. There will be no more craftsmen in Rome. There'll be no more food because no grinding of grain, no more lights. Some people think that they had some sort of actual lights. Rome had actual street lights at that time. There'll be no more marriages. So everything that you find joyful about life, it's all gone, right? It's just it's the apocalyptic picture. Just there's nothing left. There's no fun. And it's happening because of their arrogance. So I have some verses to read to you now, not from the Old Testament, to start us talking about this, to see where you go. I'm just going to read, it's like a page full of these. So just story time. Are you ready? I want you to hear the prophets and how they speak into this and where I think this chapter is taking us. This is Proverbs 14. The fallow ground of the poor would yield much food, but it is swept away through injustice. Whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker, but whoever is kind to the needy honors God. Isaiah, to deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey and robbing the fatherless. Okay, here's another one. And have grown fat and sleek. Their evil deeds have no limit. They do not seek justice. They do not promote the cause of the fatherless. They do not defend the just cause of the poor. That's from Jeremiah. Ezekiel says, the people of the land practice extortion and commit robbery. They oppress the poor and the needy and mistreat the foreigner, denying them justice. Daniel says, therefore, your majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue. Amos, you levy a straw tax on the poor and impose a tax on their grain. Therefore, though you have built stone mansions, you will not live in them. Though you have planted lush vineyards, you will not drink their wine. For I know how many of your offenses and how great your sins. There are those who oppress the innocent and take bribes and deprive the poor of justice in the courts. That's Amos 5. Malachi, so I will come to put you on trial. I'll be quick to testify against sorcerers, adulterers, and perjurers. You know how bad those are. Against those who defraud laborers and their wages, who oppress the widows and the fatherless and deprive the foreigners among you of justice, says the Lord Almighty. The foreigners among you of justice, but don't fear me, says the Lord Almighty. Luke says, but when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. He says also, when Jesus heard this, he said to him, you still lack one thing. Remember this? Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you'll have treasures in heaven. Then come follow me. James has this long passage about a man coming in wearing gold rings and fine clothes, and then a poor man coming in with filthy clothes, and they show special attention to the man who is rich, and they give the other one a seat on the floor. And God says, listen, brothers and sisters, has not God chosen those who are poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised those who love him? But you've dishonored the poor. Is it not the rich who are exploiting you, and they not the ones who are dragging you into court? All right, so there's the verses. You heard the theme here. All of the prophets seem to speak about the wealth of the empire and how much God opposes that. How much he opposes, maybe not the wealth itself, but how the empire seems to use the wealth, how we oppress the poor. Like, that is a major theme. And then I read just some things. This is old statistics. My guess is that they're not good, that they're actually worse, or not become much better in time. But over 1 billion people, which I think is 1/7, 1/8 of the world, 1 billion people subsist on the equivalent of less than $1 a day. Pretty sure that's still true. $1 a day. 451 million malnourished or facing starvation. 250,000 die weekly from malnutrition and easily preventable sicknesses. 2 million deaths a year could be prevented by bags of oral rehydration salts, which cost Westerners about 10 cents each. $30 to $40 billion a year it costs to provide all the people in developing countries with basic education, health, and clean water. 30 to 40 billion. You're like, that's a lot of money. That's how much Americans spend on golf a year. Okay. For all the differences, radical Western consumerism and Marxism share the same philosophic premise. Economics is paramount over everything. Money, not God, is the controlling force in life. Norway is at the top of assisting developing countries. United States, second to the bottom out of developed countries help assisting others. We budget 20 times more for military than we do for foreign assistance. Church people, let's forget America for a second. Church people on average give 2.5% of their money to the church, or away, period. 2.5. My guess is in a group of 20 people right here, that's what our average would be. Right? Even of the people who go on Tuesdays and have a special Bible study. Right? Because we like to learn and we like to think. We don't like to act quite as much, or we like the idea is there, but one more little thing. Tony Liston, this is just a cool little anecdote. Tony Liston is a young pastor from Oklahoma. He spent 2 days in a private hospital room in the Philippines for $47 for these 2 days. Barely noticing as he entered, he barely noticed this beggar woman outside. When he left, this beggar woman, he did notice her, but he didn't notice her much. When he left, she was dead, naked, and stuffed into a dumpster, having died of the same affliction for which she had just been treated. The nurses and doctors said she didn't have any money. So the same thing, just poverty, which is what this is all about. It's about the luxury and the poverty. And we are all definitely on the luxury side. So what do you think Revelation has to say to us? To America, to us as the church, to us as individuals? What did you want to say before I cut you off earlier so we could talk about it now?
I was actually getting ready to say that the way the adultery manifests itself is in not caring for the poor. And to that, I don't know what to say. I'd be interested to hear what some of the others, but we can postulate all we want about this, that, and the other. The other passage that came to mind for me was 1 Corinthians 11, where eating of the table of the Lord in an unworthy manner. A lot of scholars think that that has to do with economic stratification in the church, and that the poor were being excluded from the table of the Lord in some way, shape, or form. And I guess when this topic comes up, I'm like,
It's
There-
overwhelming.
there's just not a whole lot to say.
Yeah.
We were having our agape feast, which we once a month on communion, so it's the second Sunday of every month. And there's a feast. I mean, too much food. And I've noticed that about most places I go to, weddings, funerals, there's abundance. And I saw this guy walking on the side of our church, and I'm outside, it's hot, whatever, and I can see him. And I was like, hey, are you hungry? And so I brought him in and brought him into our fellowship hall. He sat down and he drank some water. I gave him some water. But I think one of the kids that's in the group came and prayed over him, but like everybody else kind of looked at him like in James, like, why'd you bring this guy in our church? You know, and I'm not any better. Like I'm not saying, like, there's times when don't get skewed that I'm somehow, I'm the guy that's always bringing people in. There's times where I fall short all the time. I feel overwhelmed sometimes that I can't do anything, or maybe convicted that I don't.
Yeah, Josh, I think we heard most of that. It was, at least for me, it was pretty messy, but I got what you were saying. And I would say to you and to everybody else for you, like Josh is probably one of the men I respect most when it comes to doing that. Like he's the guy that I say, hey, we need to do something, and he's on it. And even if I don't say we need to do something, if he'd seen it first, he'd already dealt with it. So he's so good when it comes to caring for the poor and bringing them into his luxury. And Josh isn't luxurious either. He doesn't have tons, but he's always inviting people into what he has. It's beautiful. Like 1,000 times better than me. So thank you for that, Josh.
I think there's lots of ways to help, but there's also the fact that not every organization that proclaims to help the poor does the money actually get there. And I think sometimes that can hold people back too. When the earthquake happened in Haiti, I had people contacting me saying, which organization should I give to? Because they wanted to give, but you hear so many stories because there's so many people that proclaim to do one thing and do the other in our world. So I still, just like last week, our community, I think, and Randall, you probably know this, I think we do at least a fair job. I mean, there's a lot of help here, but we're just one little community. I don't know about other towns and cities. But I do know that there are organizations like I support a lot, Feed My Starving Children. And that is an absolutely mind-boggling, amazing ministry. I can't go to those countries and hand out the food, but with my job, I can give. So I would rather get my hands dirty, but I'm old and I would be in the way. But God has provided very well for me with my job that I can do that. I guess having parents that went to Haiti so many times makes me a little more in tune to how some people do live. You can't describe it unless you see it. But I am proud of our community that there is a lot of help here, but I fear that that's not everywhere. Well, I know it's not, but it's a wealthy community and there's a lot of giving here. But we're just very blessed here that happens here.
I don't think we should worry about, whether it's going to be used. You can make some plans about what you give and whatever. But I have been taught by somebody this: you help who God puts in front of you, and you don't worry about are they going to use it on drugs or whatever. You might think about what you give that would not be spent on drugs or whatever. And another thing that somebody suggested to me, which I do, is and it's very little, but I keep a $5 gift certificate to McDonald's in my car. And everybody I see on the street corner, if it's convenient for me to give it to them. And, there's McDonald's on the corner. Most every place you can walk there and you can get something, keep you from starving or whatever. Something you can do just when you're driving around. But I think we worry too much about how is this going to be used. It really, your giving is to God's children, and it's something that God probably looks at you when you give it, maybe more than he does that person to give it to.
My point was the organizations.
Yeah.
Some of these organizations, the people in charge of them and all that are skimming. And
Yeah, I think we need to plan and look.
amount.
I do think that, but I think we,
But you gotta give them faith too.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
In Chicago, you gave McDonald's money and people ditched you.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
I long for consistency in my own life. I long for consistency to apply the principle because, you have those one-off instances where somebody crosses your path and you do go the extra mile for them. I long for actual consistency from myself to seek that out, not to simply just let it come to me once in a while.
I
Yeah.
believe in both.
I think my problem
Okay.
is, I mean, I have the same problems that you guys are talking about. Do I give that $5 to that person, or do I give that $100 to that ministry? Maybe I'm burdened more with the big picture of this, like.
Yeah.
I know how much I make, and I know how much my family actually needs. Right, and it's honestly, it's probably, I don't know, even just to live in a basic, like, it's probably 1/10. Right, realistically, like, there's a lot of things that I don't have to have that I do. And if we just cut it in half, let's just say in half, like, I know that, on a great year, I would give away 15%. That was my wife and I's goal, was to get to that point by a certain spot and eventually to get to the 50%. We never made it past, I think, 14 or 15%. Right. So the reality is, as a super Christian that I am, right, as you guys all know, I'm still keeping 85% when I'm the most generous I could possibly be. Right. And I don't, I'm saving for my future. And there's wisdom in that, right? The Bible even talks about saving for our future, not being a burden on other people. Those are all things that show up there. But I don't know that my kids are all that much more important than these hundreds of thousands of people who are dying on a weekly basis because they don't have enough food. And I get that there's all kinds of problems with getting them the money and making sure it gets to them. But the reality is that those just seem like excuses to me, at least for me. I'm quickly distracted by the wealth of the empire that I want for myself. And so I try not to think about it.
I think it's important to be there and have community with the people in our own personal lives that we can. Because like the big picture gets complicated and messy. But there are people in our own personal lives that we know, and maybe some of them we know better than others, maybe some we don't. But there's people that we know in our daily lives right here that need our help too, that we could help. And I think that's where, we can make the biggest difference.
The pandemic was so destructive to, I think, young families who hadn't what we say we are doing put aside for a rainy day, and that certainly was true in my family. Losing a job and then shut down, losing income, lost your husband in June before the shutdown next March. Kids, father going bankrupt and totally leaving, just going looking for, and I thought so much during that time, what about these other people who don't have Mankey's house to go to? I mean, what did they do? How did they manage? Because that happened to a lot of people, and they're overwhelmed with the debt they accumulated. Now they're into trying to pay off or avoid somebody, taking them whatever they make this moment to pay that debt, and they still leave them without money to feed their children. I mean, we have, speaking to the people in our communities and that we know, a lot of people were really devastated during the pandemic.
Yeah. I do think it's good to care about the rest of it too, but yeah, it gets messy, right? Like it's messy. Like, how do I get those people the money? I don't know if I can trust the organizations. It's also messy. There's all sorts of stories where we think we're doing good and actually we're doing more harm than good. You send a bunch of shoes to a town in Africa and the local shoemaker gets put out of business, and all the places that supplied them with the stuff to make the shoes all get put out of business. And now the entire local economy got destroyed because we sent shoes to Africa.
Yeah.
Like, it's a mess when you try, but because we don't know what we're doing. Whereas in your own personal lives, at least you can have a better idea, have those connections, those relationships.
Like help those that God puts in front of you.
Well,
And there are
you
a lot of them in our community.
it can go to a political. I don't want to get political, but I'll say there's when you start to. That's what you say before you start to say something about it.
I don't want to get political, but somebody talk to
But yeah, but like when you start, there's 1%, the wealthy part of our country, the ultra wealthy, uber wealthy are a small percentage. And I think you start outsourcing jobs to countries paying slave. You start to say like you attack labor unions and the middle class. You have a huge gap, and so you go to rural towns in like in the Midwest, and they're desolate. They're boarded up. People are leaving these places because there's no work, and so we have to look at our own. I mean, yeah, it's nice to go send like money and shoes to like Africa or whatever, another country. But let's look at the chaos going on in our own system, our own not political scene, but our own country, like Bakersfield, where I'm at. I mean, there's parts of it that are they're just rampant with they're riddled with drug addiction and home people who are on the system, and it's just ignored. Can you guys hear me? Am I breaking up because my service is bad? Okay, so it's ignored, and people instead they're just building new houses and the wealthy are just moving on the outskirts, and they're just ignoring the problem basically, and it's exacerbating the problem it's like throwing oil on the fire by giving the poor like subsistence, like kind of like the shoe thing where it's like we're going to give you just enough to survive, and so you can get it's like then they rely on the system. Then you have generational poverty and laziness, and it's a whole thing. And my wife houses homeless people, and it's like generation after when you have a generational poverty, you have it's hard to break that cycle. And I have no idea what to say. Like all I can say is to be a microcosm of the kingdom of God, and try and do that in a small the area that I'm in. That's the only thing I'm doing with these kids. The ministry I have is this youth group. I'm trying to reach to the broken kids, and this is the hardest thing I've ever done. I mean, these kids are broken, disrespectful, poor, all of it. It's like some of them smell. I'm having to give them shoes and cologne. I'm like, dude, take a shower. I don't know. But anyways, it's insane. I have no idea how to tackle this problem, but I'm glad I have a community of people to like share my frustrations and maybe new ideas with.
It makes me sick to even talk in this conversation because I know how much of a hypocrite I am. But I also think something about what you said there, Josh, triggered in my mind the reality that the purchasing choices that we make from particular companies also aids in some of the systemic issues. And I think often we cop out from that particular issue saying, well, it's not going to matter if I stop purchasing from that company because everybody else is going to continue to keep purchasing from that company. You said something about purchasing from companies with slave labor. And I mean, the device that I'm watching this Zoom meeting on is notorious for slave labor. And so I find it interesting too that coming at it from yet another angle, because there's like 13,000 angles you can come at the poverty issue from. But yet another angle is, who am I purchasing from and what kind of values am I endorsing? Because then even comes up the topic of one of the things that was supposed to help the poor in the Old Testament, at least, and I think even into the New Testament, was the practice of Shabbat. There was something economical about taking a day off that was actually supposed to help the poor as well as expressing trust in God. We could never do that in the US at this point. And the fact that we continue to purchase on days like Sundays which is a personal beef to me because I do it. But when I was a grocery store manager and forced to work on the day that my community of faith was meeting, now I'm not saying maybe we should let all communities of faith observe their religious times, but in any event, I hated the decision for whether I could attend my community of faith or not on a Sunday morning to be made by the economic powers that be. And I hated when I heard people going out after church right away to go grocery shopping. It's like, you want to get upset with me for not being in a church on Sunday while I'm trying to support my family, and yet you are continuing to reinforce the very economic system that puts me there.
Or go to a restaurant.
Yeah.
The restaurant thing makes my teeth itch. It's like we go into church with our heads held high, and you should all go to church, and then I don't, but I have before, but I don't anymore. Then you go into a restaurant. How could they possibly be able to go to church because they're there fixing my Sunday dinner? That just puts me through the roof. Talk about hypocritical Christian. and they just fill the restaurants on Sundays, and it just makes me insane.
And we don't tip very well either.
You talk out of Americans, I'm sure worldwide, we just talk out of both sides of our mouths. Yeah,
Lori, that was a good point that you threw in there that I laughed at, but I just stopped to think about it for a second, because that is oppressing the poor, right? So there is a real hit there. These are usually the lower of the lower class workers, which some of us are maybe right here, but yeah, and then we give them the bare minimum of a tip, or not even give them the 15% that is expected.
But we give them a tract so they can have eternal life. So, yeah.
We had to give the 2.5% to the church, so and there's less for the.
I've heard of anybody actually giving a tract in like decades, but I'm sure they're out there still.
Oh, they're still doing it.
I've given tracts myself like 3 or 4 times from people, or they've been left on my pool chair at the pool, or like stuff like that. So
I'm talking about as a tip, as a, in exchange for something else that they want, but yeah. All right. Well, there's a lot for us to think about. I think the main point of this, remember, is not, hey, every one of you, what's 18 people that are left, give more money to the poor. That I think is a great side piece to all of this. But the point here is that the empire has so oppressed the poor, and we're supposed to come out of that. And we come out of that by giving, right, for sure, but maybe finding a new system. And the truth is, this system is going to be destroyed. The one that props us up and makes us happy and content and satisfied, right? It's going to be wiped out. So we've got to keep that in mind as we continue to use it and be a part of it. And we have to be a part of it. Like, we can't not be a part of it at all. But what are the moves that we can make? And for sure, everyone here, 2.5% to the church is not enough. As a pastor, I feel I need to say that, and most of you are not my congregation. So, and trust by the way, I should say this is not part of it either, but trust your elders. If you have placed yourself under them, under the leaders of the church, trust that they will put the money in good places, right? They might not, but that's not just give and let them figure out where they're going to go. There are great people in our church. Well, Jay's wife is in charge of a lot of where our mission budget goes. Trust her. You don't have to second guess everything that's happening. Will she make a mistake? Probably. Will pastors make mistakes? Probably. Okay, Jay says no, she's never made a mistake. I mean, she made a big mistake. She married Jay, but whatever. Just kidding. So, all right. I love you guys. It's time, I think, pretty much anyway. Yeah, it's time. So we're gonna sign off. Thanks for coming. Chapter 19 next week. We've only got 4 more chapters. We are close. If you guys want to hit me up with texts or whatever in some way and tell me some things that you might want to go to next, if it's a book of the Bible, if it's a concept for 4 or 5 weeks. If you just have a question you want me to deal with for 1 week, I may choose not to, but at least throw it out there and we'll see. There might be somebody in this esteemed group that is an expert on that subject too. So let me know what you're thinking.
Thank you,
Sign off.
Jace. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
All right, thanks, Jace.